Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you, Lord, for those that have come out today. They came in from different entrances. They all have different points of view. Today, Lord, we come not in condemnation, but we come in support. Today we come because we need wisdom. We need to know what's going on in Jon's mind and the different things that he cares about. We need to understand more from him, just how we can support him and how we all can support Hillsdale. Lord, I pray for the one sheriff that's not feeling well today. Lord, I pray that you'll bring healing to his body and to the others that are involved that aren't here today. Lord, I still pray that you would bless them. Thank you for all that will be said and done in this place, that we would receive wisdom and you would receive glory. Amen.
Thank you. Stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all for coming out. Sorry it's at 10 a.m. I know you all want to be at the lake and the market and the auction, but you can go. But I appreciate you being here. Mr. Albright, if you haven't heard, has pneumonia, so we're praying for him that he heals up and is able to use these last couple days before the election to get out there and earn some votes. He did send a statement to all the questions that I'm going to be able to read to you guys, so we are going to have a little bit more than just a Q&A with Mr. Rutan, and we really appreciate him doing that for us. And Mr. Hodshire was not willing to make it today. So we're going to start off with an opening statement, even though we don't have anyone to respond, and we're going to give Mr. Rutan about 3 or 4 minutes. Time, I'm not even going to time. That's not too essential. I think we'll be out of here in an hour.
Actually, can everybody hear me all right without the mic? I really don't like having to talk into a mic if I don't have to. My name is Jon Rutan. This is the 3rd time I've run for sheriff in Hillsdale County. My family's been here in Hillsdale County since 1850. It's a long, boring history lesson to go all the way back. I got into the sheriff's race in 2012 because I saw a lot of things happening in our nation. I saw a lot of things happening in our county. And I believe that we need to bring the Constitution back to the United States. It seems like we keep going farther and farther away from the Constitution and expecting that things are going to get better, and it's not. When we look at the Declaration of Independence and we read those grievances that are there, most of those same grievances fit today. But what solved those grievances of that day were the Constitution. And I think instead of going away from the Constitution, we need to get back closer to it. And I think if we do that, that'll solve the problems. I served in the military. I've worked in corrections. I own my own business in Hillsdale. I've been married to the love of my life for 36 years. And we have 3 beautiful daughters. And I absolutely depend on their love and support. But I'd like to put myself forward to be the sheriff of Hillsdale County if the people choose me. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I don't think Albright had an opening statement necessarily, but he said he'd like to thank you all for being here. So we'll start with the first question. I'll give Mr. Rutan the opportunity to answer, and then I'll read Mr. Albright's response. What experience do you have that prepares you for the role of the Hillsdale County Sheriff?
Well, I think the experience that helps me a lot was 12 years in the military, time as a platoon sergeant, a drill sergeant. So I understand leadership. I understand leadership in application, not just in theory. I spent 8 years working in the Department of Corrections. I worked in Gus Harrison Regional Facility. That's a multi-level prison over there. August 13th, 1995. I was at ground zero of a riot we had there one night. We lost 3 out of 6 housing units and had to take them back with gun squads the next morning. I was a charter member of the emergency response team for the Department of Corrections, which actually is like a SWAT team or the police department for the sheriff's, or for the, for the corrections department. We learned that we needed something like that when we had the escapes in Baraga. And so I've done joint training with the Michigan State Police. I was a weapons trainer for the Department of Corrections, field training officer. So I think as far as the law enforcement portion of it, I understand it, I get it. I've had criminal justice classes at Jackson Community College and at Kellogg Community College. In fact, I received my corrections certificate from Kellogg Community College, highest honors. I was an honored graduate out of the Drill Sergeant Academy, honored graduate out of the DeMars Corrections Academy. So if you can tell, I'm not one that, I'm a kind of an overachiever. I teach the Constitution every Tuesday night, the Federalist Papers. I've been a student of the Constitution for quite a few years since the military. And I can just see where it's the answer to our woes. It was the answer to our woes then, it's the answer to our woes now.
And on behalf of Mr. Albright, what experience do you have that prepares you for the role of the Hillsdale County Sheriff? What has prepared me for the role of the Hillsdale County Sheriff is that I have served Hillsdale County residents for almost 39 years as a law enforcement officer. I have dedicated my entire life as a police officer. During those years, I have responded to and supervised homicides, 2 fireworks factory explosions with horrific loss of life and pain and suffering to families. I have dealt with infant homicides and fatal traffic crashes. I have responded to and apprehended armed robbery suspects. I have seen horrific crime scenes and successfully supervised those scenes and arrested those responsible for these horrific crimes. These cases were solved due to my training and experience. I have attended thousands of hours of training during my 39 years of serving the citizens and county that I love. I live and breathe law enforcement. The reason for running for sheriff is that I love this county and consider it an honor to serve the county that I love. I have served as a supervisor for over 35 years and have gained knowledge and experience all those years. I did not just recently decide to be the sheriff. I have prepared for 39 years, being the only licensed police officer running for sheriff as a Republican. In summary, my entire career has been in preparation for this moment in time. I would consider it an honor to serve the great citizens of Hillsdale County as your next sheriff.
I think that deserves applause.
What is the sheriff's role in relation to the Michigan and U.S. constitutions?
The sheriff's role is a very important role. We actually see the history of the sheriff come about in the Magna Carta of 1215 in chapter 61. Prior to that time, the sheriff was called the Shire Reeve. He was the protector of the Shire, and that's where the modern day term sheriff comes from. Prior to 1215, the sheriff the Shire Reeve was second only to the king. So in the Shire, the sheriff was the embodiment of the king in the Shire. So when the king was back, or when the sheriff was back at the kingdom, then only the king was hired. Now what we saw in 1215, the king became very malevolent. He was very despotic. He was taxing the people to death. And there was a rebellion, and the barons and earls came together, and they put a sword to John's throat and forced him to sign the Magna Carta of 1215. Now that Magna Carta of 1215 gave us a few things. It gave us the rule of law. It gave us the due process that we look at. But what it did was it took any injuries that were done by the king to the people out of the hands of the king and put it into the hands of a sheriff that no longer answered to the king, but answered directly to the people. So that's the ancient history of it that brings us all the way up to today. So that now that we are under the Constitution, in the Michigan Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, Michigan Constitution, the sheriff under Article 6, Section 1, Clause 3 takes an oath to uphold that Constitution. Now, it's incumbent for that sheriff to understand what that Constitution says and what the rights of the people are. Because his first job and his most important job is protecting the rights of the people. Not from their neighbor, but from government. Just as in 1215, it was the job of the sheriff to protect the people against the king and the king's injuries to the people. So that ancient history comes all the way up till today. And now that we're under the Constitution of the United States and Michigan Constitution, that is still the most important part, the most important job of the sheriff is to understand those constitutions, understand where the rights of the people are, and be that firewall between an overreaching government, whether it be local, state, or federal, and the rights of the people.
Thank you, John. What is the sheriff's role in relation to the Michigan and U.S. Constitution? From Mr. Albright. The sheriff's role in relation to the U.S. and Michigan Constitution is that the sheriff's authority is delegated by the Michigan Constitution. When elected, the sheriff swears an oath to support both the U.S. and Michigan Constitutions. I believe the sheriff's role is to support the Constitution and carry out those duties assigned to him by those sacred documents. I, however, realize that the role of the sheriff is to enforce the laws enacted by the legislature. The sheriff's role is not to interpret the laws. That is up to the judicial branch of government. As sheriff, I must realize that the balance of powers between the three branches of government must be observed. In closing, I believe that the sheriff's role in relation to the Constitution is to follow the framework set forth in both sacred documents and then to carry out his duties in compliance with the Constitution. And my last question, what are the biggest threats to Hillsdale County and how will you address them?
So the biggest threats to Hillsdale County, the first one that I can think of right now would be an overreaching government, would be one of the biggest threats right now to Hillsdale County. It's a threat to our freedom. It's a threat to our Constitution. One of the other threats that we have is we do have a problem with meth and heroin addiction. We need to start looking at those things. We keep doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different result, and it's not working. So we've got to get a little bit more, put a little bit more thought into it and maybe operate outside the box a little bit and start looking at some different ways to handle this. A lot of times we've been dealing with it as a law enforcement issue, and I don't think it's one or the other. I believe that it's a law enforcement issue, it's also a medical issue, it's also a community issue. Idle hands is the devil's workshop. When we have high unemployment, we usually have high drug use. We've got to stop that. We've got to start looking at this thing multifaceted. We've got to start getting church groups involved, we've got to start getting community groups involved, and we've got to start getting families involved. Because you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. That person has to want help to get help. The other thing is we've got to do things a little bit different with law enforcement. If people want help, it's not good to then drive them away from asking for help, because when they get there, if we bludgeon them with the law, then of course who's going to want help? So we've got to be open for those people that need help, that want help, and be able to do it in a multifaceted way. But those are the two biggest problems I see with Hillsdale County and the threats to our freedom and to our county.
Thank you, John. And again from Mr. Albright. The major problem we as a community face in Hillsdale County relates to drug use, production, and sales. Over 1/3 of our current jail inmates are housed due to drug-related crimes. This problem is complex. In order to aid first-time offenders, my office has partnered with the courts and a multitude of other service agencies to aid and divert first-time offenders from the criminal justice system. This is accomplished by giving the first-time offender drug counseling and mentoring services and many other services that aid the offender to successfully complete this intensive program. Upon completion, the offender's criminal charges are dismissed and they can continue on the path to recovery and becoming productive members of society. This saves the taxpayers thousands of dollars by not housing these offenders in our jail. I strongly support this program and have seen its success. This alone will not solve the drug problem. If elected sheriff, I will partner with other agencies to combat the drug issue. Currently, there are no grants available for our agency. The available grants are for state-controlled concept teams. I have looked for these grants extensively and found none. Once again, the local sheriff's office must handle the issue. With that in mind, I will work with our local agencies to combat the problem. As sheriff, I must stay within my budget as I have every year. We will work together and do our very best to solve this issue. Again, this issue is very complex and I will work with all interested community partners to solve this issue. Thank you, Mr. Albright. Appreciate him submitting those responses. And that's it for me, so we're gonna just send it to the audience now, and I believe that we have a microphone that can be passed around. Also, thank you to Daniel for doing the sound. I don't think I mentioned him, and to Gene and Mark for a recording, and for Penny for a recording as well. We really appreciate them taking the time to do that. And for Sozo Church, yes, exactly. And John Beckwith for reserving this for us. This is great. Thank you so much. And I think John has the first question for us.
I guess my question is, give us an example on the firewall.
Well, hold on, John, so you can hear.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Mr. Rutan, can you give us an example of the firewall between the sheriff and let's say our governor of Michigan? How that would affect us, how you would defend us against her?
Was everyone able to hear that?
Why don't we take, because history, if we're not learning from history, then we're planning to fail. So we need to look at history a little bit. There's been 3 cases that I know of very recently and very close that demonstrate how the sheriff does defend the rights of the people. Brad Rogers, sheriff down in Elkhart, Indiana, had the Food and Drug Administration and the Department of Agriculture that kept weekly and monthly raids on an Amish farmer's farm because he had sold raw milk to someone that owed an interest in a couple of his cows. They wanted to throw him in jail because I guess the federal government thinks that you can't drink milk unless it's been pasteurized, and that the individual doesn't have the right to choose for themselves on that. So the Amish gentleman went to the sheriff and complained, and of course the sheriff, being a good sheriff, he came out and he investigated. He investigated to find out whether anybody did in fact get sick. He found out what the cleanliness of the farm was, what kind of testing they were doing. He went to the people who bought the milk and asked them if they had actually asked to buy the milk, and if they knew that it was unpasteurized. And at the end of his investigation, he found that there was no harm, corpus delicti. There was no victim, no crime. And so he got with Sheriff Richard Mack, who happens to be the originator of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. And he helped him write a letter to the federal government. That Amish gentleman was due to be in Detroit to a grand jury hearing 2 weeks prior to Sheriff Rogers sending the letter to the federal government, in which he told them if they did not have articulable probable cause and reasonable suspicion and a true warrant to be on the farmer's property, that the next time they went on the farmer's property, he would arrest the officers and he would impound their vehicles. And the Amish farmer received a letter the next week that the grand jury was over, and they have not hassled him since. So that is proof that the sheriff does have an obligation, that the sheriff does have the right within the Constitution given to them, and that is his first job, is to stand for the rights of the people. He is the firewall. He is the Shire Reef.
I have a question. To the victim, no crime. To the victim, no crime thing. If a drug addict is not stealing and not driving and is arrested for possession of meth, how is that really legal if there really is no victim? If he's his own victim, it would put him in the perspective of the guy that's drinking the milk. He didn't get sick. The guy's not complaining he's sick. I mean, how does somebody get arrested like that?
Drug crime does have victims, especially when we're talking the hard drugs like meth and heroin. That becomes a driving force to people that they have no control over. These are things that we have to control. The cooking meth in homes, typically what happens is people don't cook the meth in something they own, they cook the meth in something you own, and that destroys the property. So there is a victim. If they overdose and they need to be Narcaned and somebody has to call, the public is the victim because we're paying tax money for that ambulance. We're paying tax money for those first responders. And we have to do that. We can't just let someone overdose and die. That's not what we are. That's not who we are. We take care of people. That's what we do. So we have to look at things. And sometimes we look at things and go, well, there was really not a crime there because there's not a victim. But there is a victim in those crimes. Of course, having someone be beaten up because they won't put a mask on when they walk in public, of course, wearing a mask or not wearing a mask isn't creating a victim. But when you force someone against their will to wear that mask, then you have created a victim. So.
I have one more question. Recently, Governor Whitmore vetoed a bill that was put on her desk. I think it was a bipartisan bill, 74-36, that was disallowing or not forcing COVID-19 into nursing homes. Would you consider that murder?
Like I said, we have to protect those vulnerable in our population. Drug addicts are one of them. They are the vulnerable people. Well, our elderly are also vulnerable. And to take something that we know, when we have elderly people that have conditions that even a common cold can kill them, putting something that we know is a known virus that brings upper respiratory issues and bring them into a nursing home where we need to take care of the most vulnerable of our population, I would consider murder, yes.
How do you feel about work release, community service, stuff like that? You know, our roadsides are looking trashy. Is that something you take in consideration for the prisoners to come out and work on the roads?
Absolutely, 100%. One thing I learned about corrections is a lot of people say, well, they've got TV in there and they've got weightlifting, they've got all these other things. A lot of times in the prison systems, we use those as control devices because idle hands is the devil's workshop. And in the state prison system, they didn't let us do the work release programs like we needed to. In the jail, yes, I think that's the most appropriate thing. Number one, if you've harmed society, you need to give back. And that's a way to give back to society. Number two, if you're busy working, you're not busy fighting. You're not busy causing other issues in the jail. And not only that, let's face facts. Hard work is good for the soul. When you go out and you work hard, when you come back, all you want is a hot meal, a hot cot, and a hot shower. And there's reflection. So I think it's a good thing. However, where we're going to meet a lot of our opposition is in unions. We have unions that say, well, we can't take people out and clear the road because you might be taking a job away from someone else. When we've got roadsides that have gone 3 years and never been mowed, I don't think I'm taking a job from anyone. And I think it is a good deal. I think it's appropriate. The other thing is, you'll find in most incarcerations, those people are more than willing to get out and work because it makes their time go faster. It really does. When you sit and vegetate in a cell, life seems to drag on forever. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of work release, getting people out, getting them working, getting them back to society. Of course, now the jail is a little bit different than the prison. In the prison, everyone that is there is adjudicated guilty. Where in the jail, we have people that are awaiting trial that are innocent until proven guilty. So it takes a little bit different consideration in those conditions. But I think I'm up for the challenge of that.
John Smith, I'm the campaign manager for Rutan, so I just wanted to make it clear right from the rip. But John, as you know, on online, the main question, or one of the main questions that we see, or I guess maybe not even question, but statements is, it's not the sheriff's job to interpret the law. It's for courts to do that, right? So why don't you go ahead and explain to everybody what that means?
I know we all learned in the John Dewey public school model that laws are created by the legislature, and that the executive enforces the law, and that the judiciary interprets the law. If you can show me in the Constitution where it says that the judiciary is supposed to interpret the law, I'll accept that, but it's not there. Judges, when they take an oath of office under Article 6, Section 1, Clause 3, they take the same oath that the sheriff takes, and that is they swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. They don't have to interpret it because it's already been interpreted in 85 Federalist Papers. So when the sheriff takes an oath to uphold the Constitution, he needs to know that anything that is repugnant to the Constitution is void. And there is no obligation by any law enforcement to enforce void law. Now, where I get this is they always say, well, it's the Supreme Court that has to decide what's constitutional and what's not constitutional. First off, we have to understand that the Constitution, the word Constitution means contract. The contract, the parties to the contract were the people of the several states. Those are the parties to the contract. The contract produced a product. That product was a federal government of 3 branches. Never in contract law anywhere does the product of the contract get to dictate the provisions of the contract. Only the parties to the contract can dictate the provisions of the contract. So the sheriff, in understanding that, understands that he has to look at what the very principles of the Constitution are. And under Article 6, Section 1, Clause 2, the very beginning of it says that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And for any other law to be as supreme as the supreme law of the land, it must be made in pursuance thereof, which means in spirit and form the same. Now I can demonstrate that between the U.S. Constitution and the Michigan Constitution very easily. Under Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, it says that every state must guarantee their citizens a Republican form of government. Republican form of government means there has to be a contract between the people creating the government. That's what we have in Michigan with the Michigan Constitution. Now, for that Constitution to be as supreme as the U.S. Constitution, it has to be in pursuance thereof. So let's just take the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Michigan has in Article 1, Section 6 that says everybody has the right to keep and bear arms for the defense of himself and the state. So you can see, even though they're not word for word, they are one is pursuant thereof the other. In spirit and form, they are the same. So farther down in Article 6, Section 1, Clause 2, it says, anything to the contrary in the constitutions or the laws of the state, notwithstanding. Now what that means, John Marshall told us what that meant in 1803 in the Mulberry versus Madison case, in which he said anything that's repugnant to the Constitution is void. And all judges in every department are bound by that instrument, thus showing us again that the people are freed by the contract of the Constitution, but all of us that take an oath are bound by it. So it's incumbent for your sheriff to understand those principles so that he can uphold the Constitution. Now what happens is, and what we've been doing since the progressive period of 1913 of Woodrow Wilson, is we hold the citizen guilty of whatever the legislature signs, because it's law. But is it pursuant thereof, or is it repugnant to the Constitution? I don't know, John. That's your business to take it to the Supreme Court, spend $150,000, $250,000 to find out whether it's going to go there. And oh, by the way, it's appealed by leave. If they don't want to take it because it's too political, they're not going to. And that's how we decide what's constitutional and not constitutional. That's not how it's supposed to be. As sheriff, I'm bound by that instrument. So I have to follow what I believe is constitutional by the principles and the 85 Federalist Papers that explain that Constitution to me in its very ideology. And then if the governor has a problem with me doing that, then she can sue me. And I'll take it to the courts because I have said I will defend the Shire. That's my job.
Thank you, Daniel. Mark Nichols. Could you explain, Mr. Rutan, what Lincoln said, that who was the master of the constitutions?
Yes, that's a very good one. Lincoln said that we are the true masters of the law, that we shouldn't endeavor to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men that would destroy the Constitution. And we've had quite a few years of destroying the Constitution. We've had quite a few years of turning us over to a democracy rather than the republic we were intended to be. What Lincoln was talking about is the people are the final arbiter of what is and is not constitutional. But for the people to take their rightful place as masters, they have to understand what that law is. They have to understand what their rightful place is. They have the ability to nullify law. States have the ability to nullify law. Counties have the ability to nullify law. These aren't my words. If you study the writings of Thomas Jefferson is very clear on how to nullify something that is unconstitutional that you have taken an oath to. And it's simply by saying no.
Fred Johnson. John, what would you do or how would you handle any current corruption or future corruption within the Sheriff's Department?
I'm glad you asked that. Democracies breed corruption. Republics take care of it. And the problem is we've pushed ourselves closer and closer to a direct democracy and away from our republic. So if we're going to think that there's not corruption in our town of Hillsdale, we're kidding ourselves. There is corruption. One of the reasons I want to start the Citizens Advisory Council is because our founding fathers understood ever since 1044. I mean, our history comes from 1044. We have to look at that 700 years of history leading up to the Constitution, 5 genealogical documents that brought us there. These are the founding fathers that our founding fathers talked about, those that came up with these concepts of liberty, these that fought hard to get the 1100 Charter of Liberty, the Magna Carta of 1215, the Petition of Right of 1628, and so on and so on and so on. One thing they realized is power throughout this 700 years of history, it shows that power always corrupts. And at some point in time, when the people are no longer paying attention to the power, those with power become corrupt. Now that doesn't make them bad people, it makes them human. Because we are human and susceptible to corruption. Madison talks about it in 51, in Federalist 10 when he said, faction is sown in the very nature of man. In the Christian religion, we call it the sinful nature of man. Lord Acton in 1843 wrote a paper to the Archbishop in which he coined the phrase that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And he said that people that have that kind of power will actually, in their own mind, they will twist it and make it a good thing when no one else sees it as good. So to think that we don't have corruption when we've had unchecked power, we're kidding ourselves. I'm a human being. I'm susceptible to the same thing that every human being is. So I have to take the lessons from history and the lessons from our founding fathers. And I need to set up this Citizens Advisory Council. Because that Citizens Advisory Council, setting it up the way I'm going to set it up, is going to be the check and balance on, first off, my power, so that I can't become corrupt, because I don't want to be. So I have to understand that I'm susceptible to it because I'm human. So I'm going to set that check and balance up first off. With that, any credible complaint of any corruption, I will investigate. And I happen to take George Washington's theory to heart, and that is I'm friendly to everyone, but I'm no one's friend.
Mr. Rutan, could you go a little bit further on the difference between interpreting the law and upholding the law?
Okay, first off, we have to understand the very basis of the law first. Man is born of God and operates under the pleasure of God, and thereby he has rights, and those rights are protected by the common law and the Constitution. Corporations are born of government. They operate under the privilege, or they operate under the pleasure of government, and thereby they have privileges. And those privileges are protected by the statutes and the UCC, Uniform Commercial Code. Now, where we see this idea that courts are supposed to interpret law comes on that side of the corporation, under statute, not under right and under the God-given individual right. So when we start understanding the very basis of the law, it makes it very easy for us to understand. The human being, the individual, born under God, has rights. And the Constitution is a limit on government that says you can't regulate what you don't give. You don't give the right, my Creator does. That's what inalienable means. It can only be revoked by the person who gave it, or the authority given is the only one that can revoke it. So if my Creator gave me my rights, only my Creator can regulate them or take them from me. Government cannot, except under one condition. If I violate someone's life, liberty, or property, then, with a jury of my peers, if I am found guilty under due process, then the government gets to regulate my right, then and only then, not before. And that's in, you can only be restricted of your life, liberty, or property, but only by due process, right? We know that. It's one of our amendments. So how is it the government thinks that they can regulate something that's God-given? Now, if I'm operating as a corporation, do I have to follow government rule? Yes. Why? Because I operate under their pleasure if I'm a corporation. But if I'm the individual, I don't operate under government's pleasure. So once we start understanding that, we can start understanding how, now in statute court, in situations involving corporations, that we have got to this idea that the judiciary has to interpret. And that's fine, and they do, except for the odd thing is, in contract law, you can ask any attorney, in contract law, they still go back to the ancient theory of law, which says that the product can't dictate the provisions. Only the parties do. And when you have a contract dispute, we have to go back to the original writings of the contract. So when it starts dealing with constitutional issues, we're supposed to be going to Madison, Hamilton, and John Jay, not to Kennedy, Thomas, and Ginsburg.
Can we go to the back left over here? I'm pretty sure there was a question before. Thank you.
Sorry.
Dennis Wainscott. John, how do you feel about the nepotism and the cronyism that's been going on in this county and in this our sheriff department for these many years? And what would be your stand on this as the new sheriff to eliminate this problem that we see that of the cronyism and nepotism that's been happening for many years here in our county?
That's a very good question. I think I have a degree in management and organizational development and studying business, a bachelor's in business. One of the things that we study in business and one of the things that we know to be true is familiarity breeds contempt. And in business, we never like to see nepotism. When you have high nepotism, you're risking that company, that business for failure. And sadly, we have seen in the Hillsdale County Sheriff's Department at one time we had up to 50% nepotism, and we've been down as low as 27%. Now, nationwide, any Fortune 500 company will tell you if they're over 1%, they're nervous. They don't like any more than 1% nepotism because it causes all kinds of problems. Cronyism is the same thing. It's just done a little bit different. It's a little bit harder to weed out. But I do have plans to have policies that we need to not have family members be working with family members. When I was in the military, if you had a family member, they couldn't even be in the same brigade. They had to go to a completely different brigade. They had to separate you that far because the danger of nepotism and cronyism.
Penny Swan. My question, I've never talked to you about this, but part of my problem, I'm going to bring up the kind of elephant in my head. Part of my problem with the forgery issue was how it came out, and we never really heard specifically from the sheriff department, just through the paper and the radio. I follow social media a lot, and I see other sheriff departments, like with the governor's mandate, actually the sheriff getting on social media and talking to the citizens and not going through a paper or a radio. If you're sheriff, are you going to speak to us one-on-one live or in person and not go through media?
Absolutely. If you don't have access to the people that you elect, whether they were your choice or not, then we don't have a republic. One of the things with a republic, and only what makes a republic work, and Madison tells us about this, is the little tool called shame. This is why it's good to have people that have long history in that area that are representing you. Because if you do things wrong, not only can you shame me, but you can shame my family, and you know where I'm going to be, you know where I'm going to shop, you know where my house is. And so absolutely, I need to be available where the public can come talk to me face to face, whether it's one-on-one or in a group. So absolutely, in a situation where the public needs to be informed or the public has questions, I'm going to be absolutely available to them. See, this is why the sheriff's job is not typically a law enforcement job. I get this all the time. What's your experience as a law enforcement officer? Well, I don't know. I don't think anybody's ever asked the CEO of a hospital how many open heart surgeries they've done, right? Because it's not important that the administrator knows how to do open heart surgery. That's important for his heart surgeon to know. So in Michigan, the law says that the undersheriff must be a qualified MCOLS certified police officer. The sheriff is an administrative position. The sheriff is the one that sets the tone and the direction and the ideology of the department and oversees it. Whereas the day-to-day operations of law enforcement fall to the undersheriff. Now, I know a lot of people, and I'm sure since I'm talking about this, it's a question that's going to come up, so let me deal with it right now. I get this, you need to name an undersheriff. I'm sorry, Stan Burkhardt didn't name an undersheriff when he ran, and I don't remember him being badgered for it. Tim Parker, in the last election, didn't name his undersheriff, and I don't remember him being badgered for it. One of the other candidates, and I'm not going to say anything specific because they're not here to defend themselves, and that wouldn't be fair. But there has been another case in which someone ran before and could not name their undersheriff because they knew that if the name of their undersheriff came out, that person would be fired and their entire career would be ruined. That's not fair to that person. And if it's never been an issue before, I don't know why it is such a huge issue with me. If you trust me to be the administrator of that sheriff's office and to do it fair, why would you not trust me to pick someone that is very well qualified to be the undersheriff? So, in answering your question, yes, the sheriff needs to be accessible to the people all the time. Not the undersheriff. He's busy doing law enforcement. But the sheriff needs to be busy, because if he can't listen to the people, he can't hear the people, and he can't be shamed if he does things that he shouldn't be doing, then we don't have a republic, do we?
I'm going to take a question from the audience since, oh, okay. From Ashley Signor Baguki. What plans, sorry if I mispronounced that, what plans do you have to get more cops in the department? Are you planning to raise the wage that the officers receive?
I think that officers should get a very fair salary, right? I know in Los Angeles, there's some police officers that are making about $120,000 to $140,000 a year. That's not Hillsdale. That's not Hillsdale. I also believe that the sheriff gets paid too much, and I'll be cutting my wages. Sorry, hon. But that needs to happen. I don't think that the elected people that serve the people should live better than the people, period. They just shouldn't. So, do I have plans on looking at that? Yeah, because I've heard that there are reasons that a lot of officers are leaving because of pay. Now, I'm going to look at that. I don't know what I can do about that, but what we're going to do is we're going to take the budget, and we're going to be very fair about the budget. We have priorities that we have to look at, and we're going to look at those priorities first. And we're going to take things in a hierarchy of priorities. I'll do whatever I can, even if I have to short myself, to make sure that people have good livable wages at the Sheriff's Department, because I believe in what they do. But the other thing is, I'm not going to ask people to give more that are already giving too much. We've got to look at that different. I don't have plans to take stolen money, which is grant money, and I don't have plans to steal more money in taxation. We have to look at things a little bit different. And I think with my business degree and my business experience, and also my understanding of history and our republic, I think we'll be able to be creative to do some things and make it a very good place for them to work. Most times people don't leave. When we look at national statistics, most people don't leave jobs because of pay. They leave jobs because of leadership. So one of the very first things and the best thing I think I can bring to the department to keep officers, keep them trained, and keep them happy is good leadership.
Another question online from Camilla. Can you ask Jon where he stands on no-knock warrants and partnering up with other agencies in busting legal cannabis growing? You can use as an example, in fact, that a gun was placed to a 102-year-old woman. I am not sure what the reference is to. If you know, feel free to discuss that.
I do not know the reference to that. I do not support, nor will I ever, and the Constitution does not support no-knock warrants, period. Just doesn't support it. Think about you. Let's say, and I have to worry about the safety of my officers. I don't want my officers shot. I don't want my officers hurt. But what if we get, has anybody ever got the wrong address before? Anybody? You ever got somewhere and found out you were at the wrong place?
Yesterday.
Yeah, it happens, right? Why? Because we're evil? No, because we're human. It happens. But what would happen if I was to kick your door in at 2 o'clock in the morning? What would be your first reaction? To defend your family. In fact, you have an obligation and a duty to do so. Why would I want to take the risk of getting the wrong address and putting my officers and the public in that kind of a dangerous situation when it's not necessary? It's just not necessary. I get it. People go, well, we got to get, you know, they might have evidence in there to drugs. Okay, what happens if we knock on the door at noon and we hear the toilets just ringing? You think they're flushing drugs? Think they're probably flushing something illegal? Why do I have to kick the door in? Who's going to use them in the septic tank? Did I take the drugs off the street? Yep. But I didn't have to knock the door in. I didn't have to put my officers at risk, and I didn't have to put the public at risk. Absolutely, I am against no-knock warrants, 100%. It would have to be a very rare occasion that would have to be done. But I have yet had anybody give me a scenario in which that was necessary. As far as partnering with other organizations, absolutely. I want to partner with a lot of organizations. I think it's important to. But then again, was it Camilla?
Camilla, yeah.
Okay, so Camilla used the word illegal. If it's legal, it has nothing to do with me. Period.
This is Carla again. Rutan, you spoke earlier about how somebody could lose part of their rights or their unalienable rights, and that would be to be judged by 3 entities, I think you said, and my assumption is that would be a felony. But if you have somebody that's disabled, does their rights then go away? I mean, how do you feel about a disabled person owning a gun? If the Constitution is not supposed to be amended or changed per person if you didn't do anything wrong, then how does it get away with a mentally ill person, or, I mean, that person could be in remission just like cancer, owning or purchasing a firearm?
For that person to own or purchase a firearm, first off, they have to have a job and money, right? Second off, they have to have the ability to go there and get it, right? I get this question a lot. I mean, we can split hairs here. But the fact of the matter is, shall not be infringed is pretty clear. Shall not be infringed. And I believe that people that are physically handicapped absolutely should have guns to defend themselves, right? Because a gun is a great equalizer. I've got 3 daughters. I knew that none of them would be able to take on a 6'2", 500-pound linebacker, right? But the odd thing is, if she's got a 9mm, she's equal with him pretty quick. And so I think that people that are elderly, people that have physical disabilities, should absolutely have the right to defend themselves and the ability to. Now, when we start talking about the developmentally challenged or of that nature, so are those people living on their own? Do they have the ability to contract and make their own decisions? If they do, then they have the ability to own a gun. If they don't, then the person who's taking care of them should, right? Yeah. So that's the way I see it.
Someone in the live stream is asking if the other candidates would have the same opportunity to answer the questions. I did give all the candidates the questions that I was going to ask beforehand, and they can write them online, or I gave them the opportunity to send them in, as I read with Mr. Albright. And now another from Ashley. The sheriff's department, from a financial standpoint, is in disarray. Do you have a business background? Well, you already talked about that, but maybe answer what you will do on the financial side.
On the financial side, one of the things we have to do is we have to set things up in priorities. What are our priorities? What are the things that constitutionally we have to do first, right? The sheriff has to maintain a jail, and the sheriff has to provide for court security. So these are two thou shalt that I have to as sheriff. So we have to do those things. So we have to take things that are the top priority and put them in first. Then things that are lesser priority we'll put in down the line. That's how it goes. But just like anything else, I mean, how many people have a family budget in which everything that you, from the top priority to your greatest want, gets on the budget? You ever get it all? I've never been able to get it all. So what happens is I start with the high priority needs, and those needs get taken care of first. Then if there's wants, I take the high priority wants, and those go on the list until I get to the point that I realize that there's some wants I'm not going to get. So I think the important thing is to set the budget up that way, to look at those things. I'm sorry, I don't think that we need smartwatches and drones in Hillsdale County. I don't think that we need a helicopter, or not that we have, or anybody's suggested it, but I don't think we need a helicopter or tank. This is Hillsdale County. Let's look at the things that are specific for Hillsdale County, the things that we need. But one of the most important things that we need, way more than we needed smartwatches and drones, was body cameras. Body cameras are good because they provide one of the greatest transparency devices there are. Now, there's a lot of people that go, well, especially some unions will go, well, you just want that so that you can fire people. No, I want that so that when someone says that that officer did something wrong, and we look at their report, and we look at the camera, and it's exactly the same, it saves the county money so that we're not being sued. Also, it does protect the public, because every now and then there is a bad officer, and that protects the public from that. So there are some things that were necessary that we should have had that we never even entertained, and there were things that we have that we'll never use. So we've got to start setting our priorities better.
Mark?
Mark Nichols. One of our founding fathers, I believe it was Benjamin Franklin, said those that'll give up liberty for security deserve neither. I want to read the definition of liberty, if I may. Could you hold that for me? I'll put on my glasses. Thank you, sir. Liberty, by this definition, is twofold here, two definitions. The state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behavior, or political views. And the second definition is the power or scope to act as one pleases. How do you feel about the governor's executive orders in regards to mask wearing, the health department's, for lack of a better word, strong-arming businesses to try to make them be the mask police? I was not denied entry, but very discouraged of an entry into a food establishment in the last week or so, stating that the next time I come back, I had to have a mask to enter that.
Well, let's look at two words, freedom and liberty. Freedom means I'm free to do whatever I want to, unencumbered by anything. I'm free to kill, free to steal, free to lie. That's freedom. We don't have freedom, we have liberty. Liberty is freedom with morality. If you don't have morality with freedom, you don't have liberty. So one of the problems that we've seen, I think everybody can say this, we've seen less and less morality. This is what's bringing us to a point where we are seeing these issues, we're seeing these problems. We have a governor that believes in the progressive ideology of direct democracy, and that's what they want us to be. And we're so desperately fighting to have liberty under a republic form of government. When it comes down to the face mask thing, I mean, this is what licensing is, in fact. Licensing is the art of the state stealing your rights and then selling them back to you every year on a piece of paper. That's called licensing. It was supposed to save us, it was supposed to protect us, it was supposed to do all these things that it never has. Part of that licensing is part of that progressive ideology of, under this side of corporations or government, corporations operate under the pleasure of government. So it's good to have licensing and make these corporations, because then who controls them? Government, right? And we've seen this with Governor Whitmer's orders. Let's not lose the fact that people have personal property rights to their establishment. If I say everybody has to wear a Detroit Tigers ball cap when they come in my restaurant, or I'm going to deny you entry, I can do that. Problem is, I'm only going to get Tiger fans in there, and those two people probably won't keep my establishment open for a long time, right? But we reap what we sow. And Lions. Well, I wanted to double my market, so I said Tigers. But anyway, so we have these personal property rights, and those people, and we have to respect personal property rights. Such as if I go in somewhere and they go, you have to have a mask, guess what I do? I vote with my money. I go somewhere that doesn't tell me that. I go somewhere where I feel more accustomed. I go somewhere where I feel like my business is wanted more. We all do it, right? Some prefer this store over that one. Some prefer this restaurant over that one. Some prefer these friends over these friends. It's a natural thing in life. And this is what free markets are supposed to be based on. So there are personal property rights. If somebody wants me to wear a mask to be in their establishment, I have to make a decision whether I want to wear that mask to be in their establishment or whether I decide not to. Now, where I draw the line, and I don't like this, is where the governor's come down and said, well, I got this license on you. If you don't do what I tell you to do against your business rights and your personal property rights, then I'm going to pull this fictitious piece of paper away from you and keep you from doing business. That's wrong. That's what's wrong. So when the governor gets to say, you have to wear a mask in my business, and I say, no, you don't, we've got a conflict, don't we? We have a problem. And that's where the sheriff should understand the Constitution and say, business owner, do you want this to be like this? And they go, no. All right, then health department, you need to go. If it's not in Public Act 333, which is the health code, and I don't believe that the masks are in Public Act 333, they're in executive orders, which, by the way, only go to the executive branch of that sphere, no farther. Then the health department can't even come in on your property and say, well, you've got to do this and this and this. I'm sorry, but if you don't have articulable probable cause, reasonable suspicion, or a signed complaint that something is happening inside my business contrary to Public Act 333, you have no legal business being on my property. And I'm asking you to leave, and if you don't leave, I'm going to call the sheriff. That's what a sheriff's supposed to do. Now the problem is people go, well, then they'll lose their license. Okay. So you lost a piece of paper that hangs on the wall, and it does what for you? Continue to do your business. But that's your right to make that decision. It's my job to defend that right.
right about the hour 15-minute mark, I think. So maybe
This is my last question.
2 or
to you,
3 more.
Josh.
Yeah.
Because this is a comment that we get, John. Do you plan on firing all the deputies and officers? Or do you plan on getting rid of organizations like CASA? I didn't even know what CASA was until yesterday, so that was the line I got. So do you plan, what do you plan on doing in that nature?
Oh, yes. You know what? I read about this Jon Rutan online, and I was scared to death to meet the guy. I didn't, he sounds horrible. Yeah, no, there's a rumor going around that if Rutan gets elected as sheriff, he's going to fire everybody. Okay. Now, my undersheriff pick is a pretty good guy, but I don't know how he and I can maintain a jail and court security and be in all those places at the same time. I just don't know how that's going to happen. So logically and realistically, people should be able to think for themselves and realize that that's just crazy. It's crazy talk. No, I have no plans on firing anybody. However, I've been told that if I'm elected, all these people are going to quit. I can't stop them from quitting, but I have no plans on going in and firing people. Am I going to demand certain standards? Absolutely. Am I going to bring more training? Absolutely. Can I be kind of a hard taskmaster sometimes? Absolutely. Especially when I'm dealing with somebody else's money. But most people will never understand how good it is to be in that profession until they work for a guy like me. And as far as partnering with places, no, I'm not getting rid of anything. I'm going to be asking for more volunteerism. I'm going to be asking for more groups to come together. Look, the sheriff only has the power from the people. That's it. Without the people, there's no sheriff. Without the people, there's no need for a sheriff. So the sheriff only has the people. And without the support of the people, and the sheriff bringing in volunteers and getting these things done so that we can come together to take care of our community, it's not going to work. One person doesn't have the answers. One person can't do it all. It's going to take a combination of all of those people. So why would I ever turn away any one group or try to fracture that? My job, my dream, my hope is to bring them all together.
Question I would have would be, does the legislature of the state of Michigan have the right, or even the federal government have the right to take their authority and give it to somebody else, a bureaucrat, their authority, and to fine people? That's my question.
Yeah, that's, if you don't understand Madison's writings in Federalist 51, you'll fall for the John Dewey model of, this is the way it works. It's democracy. No, it's not. Madison 51 even talked about pitting the ambition of the man against the ambition of the man, putting natural law, checks and balances in the separation of power so that each group had a certain power, but they would jealously guard their power. They wouldn't just let someone else use it. He intended that those three branches of government would jealously guard their power. So your answer, should the legislature be delegating their power to someone else? Not in Madison's mind. It was never intended. Should the governor delegate their power to someone else? Not in Madison's mind. Never intended. Should the judiciary? Well, if that's the case, hey, let's make this thing really efficient. Let's make it really efficient. Let's hire one person. Let's give them the ability to make the law, the ability to enforce the law, and the ability to adjudicate the law, and we got a king. No, this is the reason why those powers have to be jealously guarded. This is the reason, but I get these people that go, well, he wants to interpret the law, and he wants to do what the judiciary does. No, I'm not. I don't want to interpret the law. I want to uphold the Constitution. If somebody has a problem with that, sue me. And let's let the judiciary, which is their power, come down on me, and I'll argue that. I'm not going to put it incumbent upon the people, because I said I will protect them. So I'm not. So the whole idea is understanding the paradigm. But you can't understand the paradigm of how the Republic was set up if you're not studying the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers give us the very ideology that the three separate branches of government should jealously guard their power.
All right, any other questions? I assume he can stick around for a few minutes afterward if you want to ask him anything personally. I also saw Mr. Weldon running for state rep. I don't know if he had to duck out. Oh, okay, so you can't speak with him. Thank you all for coming. You can vote in the August 4th primary this Tuesday for Mr. John Paul Rutan, Mr. Scott Hodshire, or Mr. Carl Albright.
If I could I?
Yeah, we normally would do a minute or two for a closing statement, so please.
This has been a tough race, not just for me. This has been a tough race for Scott Hodshire. This has been a tough race for Carl Albright. It's hard on our families. It's hard on our friends. It's tough to stand up and run for office. So my hat goes off to both of them. And please pray for all three.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh, for doing the moderation on this and for
Yes.
that you did. You did a fantastic
Thank you all for coming. I'm sorry this isn't what I intended it to be, but I hope it was helpful. And Mr. Albright and Mr. Hodshire both have posted that if you would like to have any questions for them, they'll be available the next couple days, email, Facebook. So reach out and ask questions to them. Mr. Rutan, of course, is here right now if you have any other questions. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, John. Thank you, Penny. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Gene and Mark. Really appreciate it. And of course, to all the candidates, thank you. It really does. That's a very Christian list.